life. I'm reading The Comedians by Greene. This novel was published in 1966, and it describes the journey on a cargo ship to Haiti. And the three comedians are the presidential candidate Smith, Mr. Jones, or he calls himself Major Jones, and the teller of the story is Mr. Brown. They are on this journey and on their way to Port-au-Prince. Chapter 6. The captain honoured us the next night with his presence at dinner, and so did the chief engineer. I suppose there must always be a rivalry between captain and chief, as their responsibilities are equal. So long as the captain had taken his meals alone, the chief had done the same. Now, one at the end of the table and the other at the foot, they sat with equality under the dubious balloons. There was an extra course in honour of our last night at sea, and with the exception of the Smiths, the passengers drank champagne. The purser was unusually restrained in the presence of his superior officers. I think he would have liked to join the first officer on the bridge in the freedom of the windy dark, and the captain and chief were a little bowed under the sense of occasion, like priests serving at a major feast. Mrs. Smith sat on the captain's right, and I on his left, and the mere presence of Jones precluded easy conversations. Even the menu was an added difficulty, for on this occasion the Dutch feeling for heavy meat dishes was given full rein, and Mrs. Smith's plate too often reproached us with its bareness. The Smiths, however, had carried with them from the States a number of cartons and bottles, which, like boys, always marked their places, and perhaps because they felt they had surrendered their principles in drinking something as doubtful in its ingredients as Coca-Cola, they mixed their own beverages tonight with the aid of hot water. I understand, the captain said gloomily, that after dinner there is to be entertainment. We are only a small company, the purser said, but Major Jones and I felt that something must be done on our last night together. There is the kitchen orchestra, of course, and Mr. Baxter is going to give us something very special. I exchanged a puzzled glance with Mrs. Smith. Neither of us knew who Mr. Baxter could be. Had we a stowaway on board? I have asked Mr. Fernandez to help us in his own way, and he has gladly consented, the purser went happily on. We shall end by singing Auld Lang Syne for the sake of our Anglo-Saxon passengers. The duck went past a second time, and the Smiths, to keep us company, helped themselves from their packets and bottles. Excuse me, Mrs. Smith, the captain said, but what is that you are drinking? A little barmene with hot water, Mrs. Smith told him. My husband prefers yestrel in the evening, or sometimes racon. Barmene, I think, excites him. The captain gave a scared look at Mrs. Smith's plate and cut himself a wedge of duck. I said, and what are you eating, Mrs. Smith? I wanted the captain to taste the full extravagance of the situation. I don't know why you should ask, Mr. Brown. You have seen me eat it every evening at the same hour. Slippery elm food, she explained to the captain. He put down his knife and fork, pushed away his plate, and sat with his head bowed. I thought at first that he was saying a grace, but I think, in fact, he had been overcome with the feeling of nausea. I shall finish up with some nuttolene, Mrs. Smith said, if you cannot supply a yogurt. The captain cleared his throat harshly and looked away from her down the table, flinched a little at the sight of Mr. Smith, who was shoveling some dry brown grains across his plate and fixed his eyes on harmless Mr. Fernandez, as though he might be in some way responsible. Then he announced in a duty voice, "Tomorrow afternoon we arrive, I hope by 4 o'clock. I would advise you to be prompt at the customs, as the lights in the town generally go out around 6:30. "Why?" Mrs. Smith demanded. "Must be very inconvenient for everyone." "For economy," the captain said. He added, "The news on the radio tonight is not good. Rebels are said to have attacked across the Dominican border. The government claims that all is quiet in Port-au-Prince, but I would advise those of you who are stopping here to keep in close touch with your consulates. I have received orders to land passengers promptly and proceed at once to Santo Domingo. I am not to delay for cargo." "We seem to be hitting a spot of trouble, dear," Mr. Smith said from his end of the table, and he took another spoonful of what I took to be froment, a dish he had explained to me at lunch. "Not for the first time," Mrs. Smith replied with grim satisfaction. A sailor came in bringing a message for the captain, and as he opened the door, a breeze set the French letters asway. They whined when they were touched. The captain said, "You must excuse me, my duty. I have to go now. I wish you all a convivial evening." But I wondered whether the message had been prearranged. He was not a sociable man, and he had found Mrs. Smith hard to accept. The chief rose too, as though he feared to leave the ship alone in the captain's hand. Now that the officers had gone, the purser became his old self again, and he egged us on to eat more and drink more. Even the Smiths, after a good deal of hesitation — "I'm not a true gourmet," Mrs. Smith said — gave themselves a second helping of nuttolene. A sweet liqueur was served, which the purser explained was on the company, and the thought of a free liqueur mesmerized us all, except of course the Smiths. Into further drinking even the pharmaceutical traveller, though he looked at his glass with apprehension, as though green was the colour for danger. When eventually we reached the salon, a programme was lying on every chair. The purser said gaily, "Chins up," and began to beat his hands softly on his plump knees as the orchestra entered, led by the cook, a cadaverous young man with cheeks flushed by the heat of stoves, wearing his chef's hat. His companions carried pots, pans, knives, spoons. A mincer was there to add a grinding note, and the chef held a toasting fork as a baton. In the programme, the piece they played was called Nocturne, and it was followed by a chanson d'amour sung by the chef himself, sweetly and uncertainly. Automne tendresse feuille mortée. I could catch only a few words of the melancholy words between the hollow crash of spoon on pot. Mr. and Mrs. Smith sat hand in hand on the couch, the rug spread over her knees, and the traveller and pharmaceutical products leant earnestly forward, watching the thin singer. Perhaps with a professional eye, he was considering whether any of his drugs might be of use. As for Mr. Fernandez, he sat apart, every now and then writing something down in a notebook. Jones hovered behind the purser's chair, occasionally leaning down and whispering in his ear. He seemed in the throes of a private enjoyment, as if the whole affair were his own invention, and when he applauded it was with a self-congratulatory glee. He looked at me and winked, as much to say, "Just you wait. My imagination doesn't stop here. There are better things yet to come." I had meant to go to my cabin when the song was over, but Jones's manner awoke my curiosity. The pharmaceutical traveller had already disappeared, but I remembered it was past his usual bedtime. Jones now called the leader of the orchestra into conference. The chief drummer joined them with his big copper saucepan under his arm. I looked at my program and saw that the next item was a dramatic monologue by Mr. J. Baxter. That was a very interesting performance, Mr. Smith said. Didn't you find it so, my dear? The pots were serving a better purpose than cooking an unfortunate duck, Mrs. Smith replied. Her passion had not been perceptibly weakened by the removal of acidity. Very nicely sung, wasn't it, Mr. Fernandez? Yes, said Mr. Fernandez, and sucked the end of his pencil. He had not gone to bed, but had changed into a pair of blue jeans, and had a whistle clenched between his teeth. So, that's Mr. Baxter, Mrs. Smith said in a tone of relief. I think she disliked mysteries. She wanted all ingredients of the human comedy marked as precisely as one of Mr. Baxter's drugs, or the label on the bottle of Barmene. The pharmaceutical traveller could easily have borrowed the blue jeans from a member of the crew, but I wondered how he had obtained his steel helmet. Now he gave a blast of his whistle to silence us, though only Mrs. Smith had spoken, and announced a dramatic monologue entitled The Warden's Patrol. To his obvious dismay, a member of the orchestra produced an air raid siren. Bravo, Miss Jones said. You could have warned me, Mr. Baxter said. Now I'm off my cue. He was interrupted again by a roll of a distant gunfire produced at the bottom of the frying pan. What's that supposed to be? Mr. Baxter demanded angrily. The guns in the estuary. You are interfering with my script, Mr. Jones. Proceed, Mr. Jones said. The overture is over. The atmosphere is set. London, 1940. Mr. Baxter gave him a sad, hurt look and announced again a dramatic monologue entitled The Warden's Patrol, composed by Post-Warden X. Holding his palm over his eyes as though to ward off falling glass, he began to recite. The flares came down over Euston St. Pancras and dear old Tottenham Road, and the warden, walking his lonely beat, saw his shadow like a cloud. Guns in Hyde Park were blasting away when the cry of the first bomb came, and the warden shook his fist at the sky and he mocked at Hitler's fame. London will stand, St. Paul's will stand, and for every death we have here, a curse will arise from a German heart against their devilish Führer. Maples is hit, Gower Street's a ghost, Piccadilly's alight, but all's well. We'll use our ration of bread for toast, for the Blitzkrieg is dead in Pall Mall. Mr. Baxter gave a blast on his whistle, came sharply to attention and said, The all clear has sounded. And none too soon, Mrs. Smith replied. Mr. Fernandez cried excitedly, No, sir. And I think, with the exception of Mrs. Smith, there was a general agreement that anything coming afterwards would be in the nature of an anticlimax. That calls for more champagne, Jones said. Steward. The orchestra went back to the kitchen, except for the conductor, who stayed at Jones' request. The champagne's on me, Jones said. You deserve a glass if any man did. Mr. Baxter sat down suddenly beside me and began to tremble all over. His hand beat nervously on the table. Don't mind me, he said. It's always been this way. I get my stage fright afterwards. Would you say that I was well received? Very, I said. Where did you find the steel helmet? It's just one of those things I carry around in the bottom of my trunk. Somehow, I've never parted with it. I expect it's the same with you. There are always things you keep. It was true enough. There were more portable objects than a steel helmet, but they were just as useless. Photographs, an old postcard, a membership receipt long out of date for a nightclub of Regent Street, an entrance ticket for one day to the casino at Monte Carlo. I was sure I could find half a dozen such if I turned out my pockets. The blue jeans I borrowed from the second officer, but they have a foreign cut. Let me pour you a glass. Your hand is all trembling. You really like the poem? It was very vivid. Then I'll tell you what I've been told before, but I've never told anyone before. I was Postwarden X. I wrote it myself after the Mayblitz in 41. Have you written much else? I asked. Nothing, sir. Oh, except once, about the funeral of a child. And now, gentlemen, the purser announced, if you will look at our program, you will see that we have come to a very special turn promised us by Mr. Fernandez. And a very special turn it proved to be, for Mr. Fernandez broke as suddenly into tears as Mr. Baxter had broken into the trambles. Had he drunk too much champagne, or had he been moved genuinely by Mr. Baxter's recitation? I doubted that, for he seemed to have no words of English except his yes and no. But now he wept, sitting straight upright in his chair. He wept with great dignity, and I thought, I have never seen a coloured man weep before. I had seen them laughing, angry, frightened, but never overcome like this man, with inexplicable grief. We sat silent and watched him. There was nothing any of us could do. We couldn't communicate. His body shook slightly, just as the saloon shook with the vibration of the ship's engine, and I thought that this, after all, was a more suitable way than music and songs to approach the dark republic. There was plenty for us all to weep for, where we were going. Then I saw the Smiths for the first time at their best. I had disliked the quick rap Mrs. Smith had given poor Baxter. I suppose that any poem about war was offensive to her, but she was the only one of us now to move to Mr. Fernandez's help. She sat down beside him, saying not a word, and took his hand in hers. With the other she stroked his pink palm. She might have been a mother comforting her child among strangers. Mrs. Smith followed her and sat down on Mr. Fernandez's other side, so that they formed a little group apart. Mrs. Smith made small clucking noises, as she might have done to her child, and as suddenly as he had begun, Mr. Fernandez ceased to weep. He stood up, lifted Mrs. Smith's old horny hand to his lips, and strode out of the saloon. Well, Baxter exclaimed, what on earth do you suppose? Very strange, the purser said, very strange indeed. A bit of a damper, Jones said. He held up the champagne bottle, but it was empty, and he put it down again. The conductor picked up his toasting fork and returned to the kitchen. The poor man has troubles, Mrs. Smith said. It was all the explanation needed, and she looked at her hand as though she expected to see on the skin the impress of Mr. Fernandez's full lips. A real damper, Jones repeated. Mr. Smith said, if I may make a suggestion, perhaps we should bring the entertainment to a close now, with Old Lang Syne. Midnight is not far off. I wouldn't like Mr. Fernandez all alone down there, so to think that we continued skylarking. It was hardly the word I would have used to describe our celebration so far, but I agreed with the principle. We had no orchestra now to accompany us, but Mr. Jones sat down at the piano and picked out a fair rendering of the awful tune. Rather self-consciously, we joined hands and sang. Without the cook and Jones and Mr. Fernandez, we made a very small circle. We had hardly yet experienced old acquaintance, and yet our cups were already exhausted. So that was the end of this chapter. Today is the 26th of August.